The Interstellar Cultural Exchange Program had sounded like a good idea on paper. And for Orion Nells, a 36-year-old former mechanic turned planetary liaison for Earth's Department of Extraterrestrial Cooperation, it had been an easy yes. He didn't see himself as someone particularly suited for diplomacy, but he had a knack for getting along with people or aliens, apparently, and he liked a good challenge. Besides, the pay was better than anything he ever got fixing busted carburetors in Nebraska. He hadn't expected his first assignment to be babysitting a wide-eyed student from the Thailen Accord by the name of Jakar. The Thailen were sapient, bipedal creatures with smooth, copper-toned skin that shimmered slightly under light, long limbs, and a gentle but unnerving way of blinking sideways. Jakar had been sent to Earth to observe natural human interactions and adaptive environmental behavior, which Orion had translated loosely in his head as "watch how weird humans are." Jakar was curious and unnervingly quiet. He carried a recorder the size of a harmonica and clicked it on any time Orion so much as sneezed. They were 3 days into the program when things finally got interesting. It was a Wednesday morning. Orion had driven them over to the suburban outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona, to visit his cousin who bred dogs. The plan was to observe human-animal relationships in a domestic setting. Earth had thousands of companion species and the Thailand had none. Jakar wanted to see what the fuss was about. "Are you sure your cousin is expecting us?" Jakar asked, voice soft but clear, his gaze fixed on the tidy white house with a low fence. "Yeah, Sheila's always up early. She breeds Chihuahuas," Orion said as he stepped out of the truck and stretched his back. "Little dogs. Real small, but they've got big personalities." Jakar didn't respond immediately. He stood by the passenger side, analyzing a rosemary bush like it was a potential threat. Orion walked up the path, opened the gate, and gestured for Jakar to follow. The alien moved cautiously, scanning every corner of the yard. He flinched when a hummingbird zipped by. Sheila opened the door, holding a coffee cup in one hand and a biscuit in the other. "Orion, you brought your alien?" "Yep, this is Jakar, Sheila." Jakar gave a slow nod and raised a hand in greeting. "Hello, Sheila. Well, you're polite. Come on in, the pack's in the back." The moment the screen door closed behind them, a shrill, unholy screech erupted from the hallway. Jakar froze. Not figuratively, his limbs stiffened, his pupils dilated, and his hands trembled. Orion turned just in time to see what had set him off. A blur of tan fur and bugged-out eyes launched itself into the room, teeth bared and barking like an air raid siren on fire. The Chihuahua, barely 8 pounds, skidded across the tile floor and lunged at Jakar's leg. Jakar let out a sound somewhere between a gasp and a plea and stumbled backward into the umbrella stand, knocking it over with a loud crash. The dog kept barking, its little legs working overtime as it tried futilely to scale his ankle. Orion grabbed the dog mid-charge and lifted it into the air. "Easy, Taco, calm down. You name the predator Taco?" Jakar's voice shook. Orion laughed, though he tried to hold it back. "That's a Chihuahua." Jakar didn't move. Orion pointed at the squirming dog in his hands. "Seriously, it's a toy breed. They're like emotional support sirens, loud but harmless." Jakar glanced at the animal, then back at Orion. "It attempted to consume my leg." No, that was posturing." "Like loud theater, it's all noise. Taco wouldn't bite you unless you were made of bacon." Sheila took Taco from Orion and scolded him under her breath. Jakar remained stiff until the dog was out of sight. "Your species lives with these?" Jakar asked. "Some people do," Orion said. "Others have cats or parrots or snakes. It's kind of a personal choice." Jakar pulled out his recorder and tapped the button. Day 3. Earthforms exhibit tolerance for aggressive microfauna. Subject Orion classified the creature as harmless despite its documented violent display. Orion raised an eyebrow. "You're seriously logging that?" It was a near-death experience. "It was a dog, Jakar. The rest of the visit was uneventful." Jakar kept a wide berth from any dog that so much as sniffed the air. Sheila tried to soothe his nerves by offering him a biscuit, which he politely declined. Back in the truck, Jakar was quiet as they drove toward downtown Phoenix. Orion glanced over. "You okay?" "I am. Recalibrating." Jakar stared out the window. "Your world is more volatile than anticipated." "Volatile?" Orion chuckled. "You haven't even seen a toddler with a drum set." The next day, Jakar requested a visit to a pet store. Orion narrowed his eyes at the request, but agreed. They visited a chain store with wall-to-wall tanks, cages, and leashes. As they walked past the aquariums, a parrot squawked from its perch and shouted, "Loser!" Jakar jumped. "That's Kevin," the teenager behind the counter said. "He picks up stuff from the customers." Orion grinned. "Don't take it personally." "I'm beginning to suspect your entire ecosystem is designed to test my reflexes," Jakar muttered. They reached the dog supply aisle and Jakar stopped. He pointed at a package with a Chihuahua on the label. "Why is this creature so prominent in your culture? Is it revered?" Orion laughed. "No, it's just really easy to take photos of. Fit him in a purse. Hollywood ran with it for a while." Jakar picked up a squeaky toy shaped like a Chihuahua and gave it a cautious squeeze. It squeaked. He dropped it instantly. "Even your imitations are aggressive." That evening, Orion took Jakar to a small community barbecue. He figured it might help the alien unwind. Kids were playing frisbee, adults were grilling, and someone had brought a speaker blasting old rock music. Jakar stood by the cooler, sipping water and watching a group of children chase each other. A woman approached with a small, fluffy dog on a leash. Jakar saw it and took one slow step back. "That one's a Pomeranian," Orion said. "Totally different breed. It's screaming with its eyes." Orion shook his head. "You're gonna need to get over this." Just then, the Pomeranian barked once. Jakar dropped his cup and stepped behind a grill. It wasn't until later that night, when Orion was applying aloe to his sunburned neck, that the idea struck him. A controlled exposure. A proper introduction could help Jakar face his fear. The next morning, he called Sheila. "Hey, you still have that old therapy dog certificate for Taco?" "Yeah, why? I've got a student who needs some." "Desensitization." It took 2 days to arrange. Jakar was skeptical at first, but Orion framed it as a scientific exercise. Controlled environment. Supervised conditions. You can end the session any time. Jakar agreed. The session was held in Sheila's backyard. Taco wore a tiny vest that said Certified Comfort Dog and sat on a cushion in the shade. Jakar stood 6 feet away, arms stiff at his sides. Orion walked over and knelt next to Taco. "See, calm, no barking, no lunging." Jakar stepped forward 1 foot. Taco blinked. Another step. "Good," Orion said. "Now hold out your hand." Jakar did. Taco sniffed it and gave it a lick. Jakar flinched but didn't retreat. "That's progress," Orion said, smiling. Jakar nodded slowly. "It is, not unpleasant." Over the next week, Orion introduced Jakar to other small dogs, a Pekingese, a Maltipoo, even a Bichon Frise named Lester. By the end of the month, Jakar could sit in the same room as Taco without flinching, but the real test came during a visit to a city park. A woman jogged by with 2 Chihuahuas on retractable leashes. One of them paused and barked. Jakar stood his ground. Orion raised his eyebrows. "No running. I remembered your words. It is theater." "And I chose not to buy a ticket." Orion laughed. Jakar looked at him. "Your species is reckless, loud, emotionally chaotic, and yet you coexist with beasts that scream at you daily." "That is resilience." "It's also poor decision-making," Orion said. "But yeah, we make it work." They walked on, the sun setting behind them and the sound of barking fading into the distance. It was a dry Friday morning when Orion brought Jakar to his own apartment. Not for any grand reason, he just needed to pick up a clean shirt, and Jakar had insisted on observing something called typical midday domestic rituals. Orion figured if the alien wanted to watch him fold laundry, he might as well let him. It was better than explaining what a laundromat was. The place wasn't much. A one-bedroom unit with a peeling balcony and a view of the dumpster behind a Thai place. But it was his and the air conditioner worked. Jakar stepped inside and paused near the entryway, eyes scanning the walls, the dented couch, the stack of mail on the counter. "You live alone," he said. "Yeah, it's a pretty common setup," Orion replied, kicking off his boots. "Some people have roommates, some don't. Depends on your tolerance for other people's dishes in the sink." Jakar wandered toward the bookshelf and hovered his fingers near a row of dog-eared paperbacks. "These are for leisure, mostly. Some are for when I can't sleep." "How often does that occur?" "Too often," Orion muttered, grabbing a clean shirt from the back of a chair. He disappeared into the bathroom and changed quickly, calling out, "Humans aren't great at shutting off their thoughts. We overanalyze. Worry ourselves into knots." When he came back out, Jakar was crouched in front of the space heater, examining the coil grips. "Is this a defensive mechanism?" "No, that's for winter. Don't touch it when it's on or your fingers'll crisp." Jakar blinked slowly. "You willingly place heat traps in your home environment. To not freeze, yeah." There was a long pause as Jakar stood and turned toward the kitchen. "Do you cook often?" "Most nights, unless I'm lazy, or if I burn something. Then I order noodles and lie to myself about trying again tomorrow. I would like to witness this process." Orion raised an eyebrow. "You want to watch me cook?" "Yes. It would further my understanding of your behavioral responses to thermal hazards and fluid phase transformations." "You mean boiling water?" "Yes." Orion walked to the fridge and pulled out a carton of eggs. "All right, Professor. Let's make an omelet." Jakar positioned himself exactly 6 feet away from the stove, hands behind his back like a museum curator. Orion cracked the eggs into a bowl, added milk, and whisked with one hand while rummaging for butter with the other. Jakar flinched slightly when the burner clicked and flared to life. "You seem unconcerned by the open flame." "Because I'm not trying to stick my face in it." "Yet you are nearby. You introduce organic compounds to it deliberately. That's called cooking." Jakar leaned forward slightly. "And you ingest the results. Unless I mess it up, then I feed it to the garbage." As the pan sizzled and the eggs began to set, Jakar tilted his head. "Is there a specific reason you do not employ automated preparation systems?" "I could, but I like doing it myself. Makes me feel like I've got some control over the chaos." Jakar was quiet for a beat. "You find comfort in minor tasks." "That's one way to put it." When the omelet was done, Orion split it in two and handed Jakar a fork. The alien hesitated, stared at the yellow triangle, then took a small bite. He chewed slowly, expression unreadable. "It has a strange texture. You get used to it." They ate in silence for a while, the only sound coming from the fan overhead. Later that afternoon, Orion's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, frowned, and sighed. "Change of plans. We've got to swing by the medical center. You've got to check in with the xenobiology team." "Again?" Jakar asked, setting the fork down. "They want updated scans, something about cellular acclimatization. I have not experienced any symptoms." "Yeah, well, they don't trust symptoms. They trust data." The clinic was tucked into the edge of the interspecies research compound, a beige building with too many windows and a waiting room that smelled like sanitized plastic. Jakar sat stiffly in the biometric chair while a nurse adjusted the scanner arms. Orion leaned against the wall, flipping through a dog-eared magazine about interstellar farming methods. He didn't read a word of it. "Still weird?" he asked without looking up. Jakar stared at the ceiling. "The process is inefficient," Orion shrugged. "So is everything. Do you undergo these examinations?" "Only when I break something." The nurse finished the scan and nodded toward the door. "Doctor will see you in a few." In the exam room, a short man in a lab coat entered holding a tablet. "Good afternoon, I'm Dr. Patel, xenoadaptation lead. Jakar, your vitals are within expected range, but we noticed something interesting in your enzyme profiles." Jakar sat straighter. "Am I compromised?" No, quite the opposite. Your metabolic response to Earth's microbial environment is robust." Unexpectedly so. Orion frowned. Can you translate that? Dr. Patel tapped the screen. His immune system is adapting rapidly, faster than anyone projected. It's almost like it's learning human immune behavior. I was not aware that was possible, Jakar said. It wasn't. At least not before your case. We'd like to run a few more tests if you're willing. What kind of tests? Stress exposure. Controlled, of course, simulated environments. We want to see how you respond to acute changes, temperature, pressure, allergen exposure. Nothing harmful. Jakar glanced at Orion. Do you advise this course of action? Orion scratched the back of his neck. If it were me, I'd say no, but you're the one who signed up to study humans. This is pretty on brand. Jakar nodded slowly. Then I will proceed. The next 48 hours were a blur of lab chambers and data logs. Orion stayed nearby, sometimes outside the glass, sometimes sitting in the observation lounge watching a monitor while Jakar sat in a sealed room full of synthetic pollen and blinking lights. On the second evening, Orion brought him a sandwich. You've been cooped up too long. You need real food. Jakar took the sandwich, examined the layers of lettuce and turkey and bit into the corner. It is not unpleasant. That's practically a compliment. As they sat side by side on the bench, Orion rubbed his temples. You know, this whole thing, it's weird. You're adapting to us faster than we're adapting to you. Jakar stared ahead. I do not consider it a competition. I didn't either, until you started outperforming half the people I know. Jakar blinked once. Do you find that unsettling? Honestly, no, I find it kind of hilarious. There was a pause. I have a question, Jakar said. Shoot. Why did you agree to host me? Orion shrugged. Felt like the kind of thing someone should say yes to. That is not a reason. All right, because I was bored, because I thought it might shake up my routine. Because someone needed to make sure you didn't walk into traffic on your first day. Jakar lowered his gaze. You are not like the others I have encountered. You mean I'm less professional? I mean you are unpredictable, and yet consistent. Orion laughed. I'll take that as a compliment. You should not, Jakar said, but his tone was almost warm. They sat in silence for a while longer, the hum of the lab equipment filling the space between them. It wasn't until the next morning that things got strange. Orion was brushing his teeth when Jakar stumbled into the bathroom doorway, clutching his side. I am experiencing a sharp sensation. Orion dropped the toothbrush. Where? Here, Jakar said, pressing his palm to the right of his abdomen. All right, sit down. Can you breathe? Yes. But the discomfort is increasing. Okay, we're going to urgent care. No, I do not wish to disrupt the study. Too late. Orion shoved on a hoodie and helped Jakar into the truck. 20 minutes later, they were in a small clinic on the edge of the research zone. The attending physician, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and steady hands, ran a portable ultrasound. It's not appendicitis, she said, squinting at the screen, but there's definitely inflammation. From what? Orion asked. She looked at Jakar. Did you consume anything unusual? I ingested a sandwich yesterday. Orion blinked. You think the turkey? No, she said. I think the bread, gluten sensitivity maybe, will run a test. She gave him a mild anti-inflammatory and strict instructions. No processed wheat for 72 hours. Jakar nodded solemnly. As they walked back to the truck, Orion clapped him on the shoulder. Welcome to humanity. Your first food allergy. Jakar exhaled slowly. Your species is exhausting. You're just now catching on. He opened the passenger door and waited while Jakar climbed in. I do not regret participating, Jakar said quietly. Orion started the engine. Good, because I think they're going to ask you to extend your stay. It was 4 days after the gluten incident when Jakar requested a visit to a human educational institution. Not virtually, he insisted on attending in person. He had already cataloged the layout of Orion's apartment, endured 2 days of clinical observation, and quietly organized all the condiments in Orion's fridge by acidity. When Orion found him alphabetizing spice jars by botanical origin, he figured it was time to get the Thailen out again. You want to sit in on a high school class? Orion asked, pulling on a clean shirt. You sure you're ready for that? I am sufficiently recovered. And I have not yet observed the transmission of pre-adult knowledge structures. You might regret this, Orion muttered, grabbing his keys. Teenagers are a whole different species. The school was a low-slung cluster of buildings surrounded by a patchy lawn and a parking lot half filled with sun-bleached sedans. Orion's niece, Maddie, was a sophomore there, and she'd agreed somewhat reluctantly to let them join her chemistry class for a day. She met them outside the admin office with earbuds in, a hoodie zipped to her chin despite the heat, and a look on her face that hovered somewhere between suspicion and resignation. So this is the alien, she said, giving Jakar a once-over. I am Jakar of the Thailen Accord, he replied. She blinked. Right, don't talk too much in class. Mr. Rand hates that. I will remain observational. She led them through a hallway that smelled faintly of pencil shavings and disinfectant. The bell rang overhead, an actual bell, not a tone, causing Jakar to flinch slightly and glance up, startled. Do not worry, Orion said, keeping his voice low. It's just the signal for organized chaos. Inside the classroom, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the walls were lined with faded safety posters. The students filed in, many of them shooting glances at Jakar but saying nothing. Mr. Rand, a man with a thinning hairline and a posture that suggested he'd once cared deeply and had since run out of steam, welcomed them with a nod. Visitors today, he said, tapping his attendance tablet. Try not to scare them off. Jakar took a seat near the back, next to a girl with glitter on her cheeks who immediately offered him a grape-flavored lip balm. He accepted it wordlessly, examined it like a rare mineral, and handed it back. The lesson began with a discussion on acid-base reactions. Orion leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, watching as Mr. Rand scribbled a pH scale on the board. Can anyone tell me why vinegar reacts with baking soda? Rand asked. A few hands went up. Jakar raised his as well. Rand looked mildly startled. Yes, because acetic acid donates protons to sodium bicarbonate, which decomposes rapidly into sodium acetate, water, and carbon dioxide gas, Jakar said. There was a pause. Correct, Rand said slowly. That's unusually thorough. The girl next to Jakar whispered, Are you like a robot? I am a scholar, Jakar replied. Mr. Rand, recovering, moved on to the demonstration. He poured vinegar into a beaker and added a spoonful of baking soda. The expected fizz erupted, foam bubbling up the sides. Several students clapped. Jakar leaned forward, eyes narrowed. You produce carbon dioxide for visual effect. It's part of the reaction, Orion said from the back. But yeah, it's fun to watch. When the class ended, Maddie turned to them. You want to come to lunch, or are you going to go back to your spaceship or whatever? Orion raised an eyebrow. We drove here. Jakar stood. I would like to observe the nutritional customs of this environment. Then brace yourself, Maddie muttered. The cafeteria was louder than the classroom by several magnitudes. The moment they entered, the sound hit Jakar like a concussive wave. He froze briefly, assessing dozens of teenagers in motion. Trays clattered, voices overlapped, an unseen speaker played distorted pop music from a corner. Orion nudged him forward. You'll get used to it. They stood in line and received slices of pizza that glistened under the lights in a way no natural food should. Maddie led them to a bench near the windows. Jakar stared at the slice for a full minute before lifting it cautiously. He sniffed it, took a tentative bite, and chewed slowly. It is tolerable. That's about as good as it gets in here, Maddie said, peeling the cheese off hers. As they ate, a boy from another table approached. He had a backwards cap, too much confidence, and a phone in hand. Hey, is it true you're not from here? Yes, Jakar said. Cool, you got any powers or whatever? I possess a highly developed linguistic cortex and spatial memory. The boy squinted. So, no lasers? No, lame, he said, walking away. Jakar turned to Orion. Is this a standard method of social engagement, unfortunately? After lunch, Maddie waved them off with a shrug and vanished into the crowd. On the way back to the truck, Jakar remained quiet. "You all right?" Orion asked, unlocking the door. "I require time to process." They drove in silence. When they reached the apartment, Jakar sat down on the floor near the window and folded his legs beneath him. Orion tossed his keys on the counter. "You want to talk about it or just stare at the cactus for a while?" Jakar didn't blink. Human adolescents navigate complex social structures with minimal guidance. The auditory levels alone are destabilizing, and yet they adapt, they function. That's kind of our thing. It is formidable or messy. Depends who you ask. Later that night, Orion made tea while Jakar sat at the table, slowly flipping through a laminated emergency preparedness guide he'd picked up from the lobby bulletin board. He tapped a section with his finger. "This pamphlet suggests humans should store 3 days of water and a flashlight. Is this common practice?" "Not really. Most of us forget until the power actually goes out. Then what occurs? We panic, complain, and raid the store for batteries and cheese puffs." Jakar closed the guide. "Your species does not prepare well." "Nope, but we recover fast." Just before midnight, Orion found Jakar standing on the balcony staring up at the sky. The city lights bled into the stars, but a few still pierced through. "Do you miss your home?" Orion asked. Jakar's voice was quiet. "It is less about missing and more about comparison. The stillness here is different, not quieter, just less symmetrical." "I'm not sure we've ever been symmetrical. That may be why your species continues to surprise us." Orion leaned against the railing. "You've been through a lot this week." "You sure you're not ready to head back?" Jakar turned. "No, I have concluded my observations. I have confirmed the resilience and unpredictability you exhibit even in mundane environments. I have experienced your discomforts, your unfiltered youth, your dietary hazards. There is little more to learn." "Sounds like you're gearing up for a goodbye." "I am." Orion nodded slowly. "You'll be missed." "That is unlikely. Your kind does not form attachments easily with outsiders." "We do," Orion said, "just not loudly." The next morning, they drove to the shuttle terminal. No ceremony, no press, just 2 people in a dusty parking lot. Jakar extended his hand. "Thank you for your tolerance. Thanks for not disintegrating anyone." They clasped hands briefly. Then Jakar turned and walked toward the hangar, his silhouette shrinking against the rising sun. Orion stood there for a moment longer, then got back in the truck. He turned the key, let the engine hum, and muttered to himself with a crooked grin. "Still not getting a Chihuahua."